When Trudeau came to power in 2015, he was one of the most popular prime ministers Canada had seen in decades, with an approval rating over 60%. But almost 10 years later, that approval rating plummeted, all the way down to just 22%. And he announced his resignation as one of the least popular prime ministers in recent history.
Generally, you could run a straight line from when he first came in 2015 to when he left in 2025.
So how did Trudeau, who once epitomized progressive politics on the international stage, become known as a prime minister no longer wanted by most of his country? Let's go through it. Back in 2015, when Trudeau was vying to become prime minister the first time around, he made a lot of promises to young people. To legalize cannabis, to get aggressive on climate change, to create a diverse and progressive country, and to listen to what they had to say.
Obviously, I'm trying to show them that we have the right plan for young people, but at the same time, I just really want them to get out and vote.
And they did. A record-breaking 57% of voters aged 18 to 24 cast a ballot that year, up 18 points from the previous election. And according to a study by Abacus Data, Trudeau scooped up close to half of them.
The Liberals, I think, really pulled ahead because they managed to appeal to a group of people who hadn't been voting consistently. And so the Liberals actually expanded the voting pool, which was really significant.
Sunny ways, my friends, sunny ways.
Fast forward a few months to September 2016, and about 65% of Canadians approved of Trudeau as prime minister. As far as approval ratings go, that's well above average.
He was on the cover of Rolling Stone. He and his wife were on the cover of, I believe, Vogue at one point, right? Those images of him, putting a winter jacket on a little girl who was finding safe haven in Canada. There was a lot of imagery to make Canadians feel good about themselves and their role in the world. And there was no question that he was the spokesperson.
He talked about values. He talked about things like reconciliation. He was talking about the environment. He was talking about changing the electoral system. And so I think there was a lot of expectation on Justin Trudeau, and there was a lot of trust in him.
But over the next couple of years, his approval numbers slowly started to wane. You may remember in 2017 when the ethics commissioner came out and said Trudeau's vacation to the Aga Khan's private island was a conflict of interest. Or in 2018, his trip to India, which was marred by multiple public relations blunders. But it was in 2019 when things really started to take a turn.
That's when the SNC-Lavalin story broke.
Allegations appeared in the Globe and Mail that the Prime Minister's office had pressed Jody Wilson-Raybould to intervene in a criminal case involving SNC-Lavalin.
The ethics commissioner agreed that Justin Trudeau was in the wrong, that he had overstepped, he had put too much pressure on her.
That had a major ripple effect, right? He lost his chief political advisor, Jerry Butts. He lost 2 cabinet ministers. The clerk of the Privy Council resigned. And it really dampened him.
And then came the blackface.
New trouble for Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. A picture of him wearing dark makeup, dressed as Aladdin at a party in 2001.
The controversy erupted overnight, forcing Justin Trudeau to speak out and try to explain.
I shouldn't have done that. I should have known better, but I didn't. And I'm really sorry.
By the end of 2019, Trudeau's approval rating had almost been cut in half, down to about 36%. And then, out of nowhere, the world changed.
Across Canada, empty streets, closed businesses amidst a deepening lockdown.
You'll have to stay home. You'll have to Skype that big family dinner.
Early on in the pandemic, Trudeau's approval rating got a significant bump. At one point, he was back over 50%.
There was a rally around the flag effect. People did seem to like Trudeau during a crisis, and the fact that he was a bit of a steady voice throughout the early days of the pandemic.
Everything we do, we need to do together.
They were putting a lot of money into the economy, making sure people weren't left behind when their jobs were lost or had to take care of elderly relatives or vulnerable loved ones.
Then Trudeau started using this wedge language around essentially like, if you're a good person, you'll get your vaccine. You get all the vaccines we tell you to get. And this is where the science is, and that's what you should do. And there was no tolerance. He started not to sound like the sunny ways guy anymore.
And all of that division brewing beneath the surface on mask wearing, vaccine mandates, and government lockdowns spilled out into the streets early 2022.
A unifying factor is frustration, wrapped up in an anti-mandate, anti-vax, anti-restrictions message.
The Prime Minister invoking the Emergencies Act for the first time in history. It gives the federal government immediate sweeping powers to intervene.
And he talked about them as radicals, as people to be dismissed, as people who were opposed to Canada almost. And that really created a big group of people, or hardened this emotion from a big group of people that they were deeply opposed to them. I mean, that's where we started seeing the Trudeau signs.
Meanwhile, inflation was soaring, eventually bringing interest rates along with it. And before long, this phrase became a regular part of Canadian conversation.
The rising cost of living.
The cost of living.
The cost of living.
Then people started asking, well, why isn't the government doing more to help me here? And there really was a sense that the federal government was out of step with where a lot of Canadians were at.
While seemingly everything started to become more expensive and Canadians started worrying more about the future, Trudeau's approval rating kept dropping. And by September 2021, it was back down to 35%. Part of that, according to the people we spoke to, was because he just happened to be the person in power during the time. Other leaders around the world were dealing with similar hits to their economies and their approval ratings too. But some also argue, as the world changed and Canadians' mindsets changed and the focus turned to their everyday needs, Trudeau and his government failed to keep up.
By this point, we're in a housing crisis, big time. And the Trudeau government is not looking like it's responsive on that. They're still not saying enough on the affordability crisis.
The tone that the Liberals had was a little bit too optimistic and not enough self-aware. There wasn't enough self-awareness of the frustration that Canadians had with the government.
When the country changed, when priorities changed, and he didn't seem to change, people started looking at him a different way.
For example, around this time, many Canadians and many Canadian premiers were becoming more and more skeptical about the carbon tax and whether the benefits outweighed the costs. But not only did the government stand firm on the tax, they actually started to increase it.
It was like, why are you doing this now? Why are you imposing this extra cost when you don't need to do it right now? I think was how a lot of people felt. And I think that further contributed to a sense that they didn't understand the affordability crisis.
By early 2023, polls showed climate change was the only issue voters trusted the Liberals to handle better than its rivals. When it came to the cost of living and housing, they were well behind both the Conservatives and the NDP. Then, some economists started theorizing that Trudeau's policies were actually contributing to these crises, arguing, for example, that his government spending was causing inflation to rise even more, and his political rivals seized on the opportunity.
The problem with spending more money as a solution to inflation is that it simply pours more gasoline on the inflationary fire, and that is exactly what Justin Trudeau continues to do.
And it wasn't just spending or inflation. Many Canadians started feeling that his ambitious immigration policies were contributing to the skyrocketing price of housing too, something he himself later acknowledged.
Ottawa has just announced a major cut to immigration. It's reducing permanent immigration levels by at least 20%.
Cutting temporary immigrant numbers by nearly 500,000 a year.
We've seen massive population growth over the past years, particularly in the area of temporary workers and temporary residents. And we are now saying, okay, we need to let our communities, our infrastructures catch up to the population. We didn't get the balance quite right.
The fact that things went so unchecked, that those temporary immigration numbers went so high, is something that Canadians, I think, have really held this government responsible for.
Trudeau would attempt to rehabilitate his image in other ways too, dedicating a whopping $8.5 billion to housing in his 2024 budget.
Younger generations are worried that they won't have a life that looks like how they grew up, like what their parents and grandparents had. Well, that's not fair.
But it became pretty clear pretty fast that it wasn't going to be enough. That the vast majority of Canadians didn't trust Trudeau to deliver what they needed anymore.
We got to the point where in the final days of Justin Trudeau's government, he was trying to offer more supports, like a GST holiday and those checks for working Canadians. And Canadians were saying, I'm not interested. I've heard enough from your government.
When you look at the long-term trend for Justin Trudeau, it was a pretty straight line, with the exception of the pandemic, which was a very exceptional moment. And I think that's what made his eventual departure inevitable, that there wasn't going to be a way for him to turn things around as dramatically as he would have needed to for him to remain in office and for the Liberals to be competitive in the election.
Interestingly, Trudeau's approval rating ticked back up a little after he announced his resignation in January.
The approval rating for the federal government's performance on US has been one of the best performance scores for this government on any issue in several years.
It's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal. But Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
And Justin Trudeau, as part of this, has received a bit of an uptick. He's still quite unpopular, but the unpopularity and the popularity have come closer together now.
Now, what Trudeau ends up being remembered for most, maybe that won't be clear for a while. But what is clear is, like any leader in power for a decade, his legacy will be anything but simple.